today, but we'll see how we go. If not, we will respond to those post the webinar. So just before we get underway, I'd just like to obviously acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I am coming to you from, and that is the Worimi and Awabakal people here in Newcastle. And I'd like to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders who may be joining us on the call today. So today's session, and I'm going to kick off, even though we hopefully other people will just jump in. It is being recorded, so you can also get access to the recording post the event. Obviously, living collections are a critical part of any botanic garden. So it is one of the defining elements of a botanic garden. And if you are looking to get accreditation, having a living collections plan or strategic document is one of those aspects that you do need to have. If you aren't on mute, could I just ask you to pop yourself on mute? Got some background noise there. And I guess there was a brilliant idea by some of our regional Victorian members, John Arnott, who was on the call today. I will give a big shout out to him, who came up with the concept of how we could create a tool that would assist gardens of any size to develop their own living collections plan or strategic document. And so the whole purpose of that is to guide you and help manage your living collections. So about the purpose of it and then the management of it. Sorry, someone's still unmuted. Just double check that. Cool. So I just wanted to, there was a group of 8 within the working group and that was from across the network. So we even had some New Zealand input in there of strategic horticulturalists and curators who brought together this toolkit, and it is quite an incredible piece of work. And I want to say a huge thank you to all of that working group, and a shout out to Cherie Parker, who's also on the call, and then Tessa and Andrea, who will be running you through the demonstration today. They've really led, I guess, a lot of the development here from Andrea Proctor Landscapes, and a huge thank you to them because this is, just as I said, it's an awesome piece of work. As you'll see, the idea is at the end, you can actually push a button and it will spit out our living collections strategic plan for you. So obviously there's information that you have to input into that about your specific garden. You have to answer questions and in relation to what you're trying to achieve. And then you get this fabulous document at the end of it. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Andrea and Tessa, who are going to run you through the demonstration today. I will just do one more shout out, which is to the Victorian Regional Committee, who actually applied for the grant to fund this, and it is thanks to the Victorian State Government that we are enabled to actually develop this toolkit. So a huge thank you to everybody involved in that aspect as well. Over to you, Andrea.
Andrea, you're muted.
Sorry, I was still muted. So just bear with me while I set up the screen share, because it never likes letting me do it in advance. And I'm just going to have it so I can still see all of you on top of it. Okay. Sorry, everyone. You'd think by now we'd all be all over this. Okay, can everyone see that? Yep, great. So yes, I'm Andrea from Andrea Proctor Landscapes. I've got Tessa come from my team here as well. We're going to be doing a tag team on demonstrating this project for you. And I think it's been an incredibly exciting project. It did start with John Arnott and a workshop that was held at the last Global Botanic Gardens Congress in Melbourne. We had John, we had Emma Simpkins, and we had a team from Missouri Botanic Gardens. And we really looked at some of the challenges to collections planning in Australia. So I'll run through it. If you want to ask questions, Tessa's going to monitor the chat, and then we'll stop when she's demonstrating her part of it. But I did want to start with some thank yous, and I know Cass has said it, but all the work my team have done with BGANs has shown me that this is built on volunteers. I know a lot of you are employed by Botanic Gardens, but even those employed are often doing this of their free time. Really going over and above, and particularly John Arnott, who had the original suggestion, and Cherie Parker, who's been running, I'm sorry if I've got your title wrong here, Cherie, but running the Be Calm forums in Melbourne. Both of them have put so much work into this. We then had Wendy Farley, who did the graphics, and Isaac Feeney, who's built the website, and this incredible working group of Wolfgang Bopp from Christchurch, John Sandham, Adelaide, Tex Moon, Dandenong Rangers Botanic Gardens, he stepped into John's role there, Amanda Shade, Peter Symes, Donna Thomas, Amelia Jensen, Cass Nichols has been helping manage it, and Rebecca Harcourt's been helping in the background. And I just wanted to mention all those people because this is not just a thank you, this is real. These people have put so much work in. So we're going to talk to you about why we've developed the toolkit, some background to the project. Sorry, I'm just trying to see my screen better. An introduction to the toolkit, some of the principles of curation, and then we're going to do a demonstration and talk about what's next. So it did start with this workshop that we did in Melbourne. And the workshop in Melbourne, Emma Simpkins, I don't know if Emma's here today, but she asked a whole series of questions and she shared these results with us. But this was a really important one. We asked everyone in the room if they had a formal living collections plan. And 52% did not have a living collections plan or did not understand how it related to their work, which is really significant when, as Cass said, the thing that makes a botanic garden is its plant collections. So, I mean, some of these would have had collections but not had a plan for it, but it is really interesting. And our team does a lot of work with smaller regional botanic gardens, talking to other people in BGANs. There's an awful lot of reasons why gardens don't have a living collections plan or some of the challenges to planning there. The first one is too many collections and not enough staff. There's a whole lot of you, I'm sure, where your collections are a mile wide and an inch deep. You've got all these legacy collections. They're not really curated. They're managed as garden beds and you just can't keep up. Quite often we've got beautiful historic gardens, but no collections curation. So you might have a lot of really interesting plants in that garden, but it's really that stamp collecting approach. It's one of this and one of that. The opposite can also happen. You can have really strong collections curation. You know what's being collected. You're actively curating it, but you're not sure why you're doing it. There's sort of not this sort of sense of, you know, a really strong rationale for why we have a Araucariaceae collection or why we have a New Zealand collection. You can have collections that aren't suited to the current climate. There can be a lack of time and budget for collections planning. A lot of people are working in local government where the priorities are over litter collection rather than living collections. Lack of time to mentor and support developing gardens. Now, a lot of the sort of high profile gardens do a lot of work in supporting the smaller ones, but that's something else that comes out of your time. And then you've got difference in scale and approach across the network and a lack of precedents to work from. And I had a really interesting conversation back in 2022 with someone from Singapore Botanic Gardens who does a lot of support of regional gardens in Asia. And she said the number of those gardens that came to her and said, can we see a copy of Singapore's living collections plan? And she's like, no, you don't want to see ours. It is way beyond you in scale. And a lot of the living collections plans that are out there are extraordinary. I mean, Melbourne Gardens has got an extraordinary collection. Sydney's just finished theirs. But these are not something that's necessarily achievable for the smaller regional gardens that might only have 2 or 3 horticulturists if they're lucky. So what does the toolkit provide? The first thing it provides is best practice peer-reviewed advice on managing your collections. Now, we don't mean peer review as far as scientific peer review, but we've got that whole working group that this was developed in. So we had some of the best minds in botanic gardens and collections management in the room in Australia, and we workshopped how we developed this toolkit over a whole series of meetings with them, and they were extraordinary. So, you know, we've had really great minds working on how to sort of come up with the approaches here. It's got detailed resources, guidelines, detailed information to enable any garden, no matter what size, to develop a professional living collections plan. So lots of links, lots of information, lots of advice on how to go about doing this. And For some of the bigger gardens in the room, we're calling them tier 1 gardens. These are the major city capital gardens. They're well resourced. They've got their collections under control. A lot of you might actually be mentoring smaller gardens, and the whole toolkit may not be useful for you, but there's still elements of it as far as prioritising collections that may be useful, or maybe something you can point people towards when a small organisation comes to you and says, we want to develop a botanic garden. We've then got 2 tools after all of that information. We've got the Living Collections Assessment tool, which helps provide, it helps you objectively prioritise your collections. So you basically put in a whole list of everything you are collecting and everything you might want to collect. It asks you a whole series of questions on your resources, your capabilities, your priorities. You then assess each of those collections point by point, and it gives you the ones that best aligned to your strategic direction there. And then we've got the Magic Living Collections Plan tool, which basically you answer, this is not AI, I need to say too. I have had this question asked. This is not. This is more like your old-fashioned choose your own adventure if you were a teenager of the 90s. We ask you a whole series of questions. It's a mix of provided text and text that you add. And at the end of the day, you push a button and you get a fully formatted, graphically set best practice living collections plan for your garden or arboretum. And this tool is going to be available free for institutional BGANS members. And there's about $40,000 in market value there in the intellectual property, in the graphic design, in everything that's gone into providing that background there. If you were to go to the open marketplace and ask external organisations to produce this for you, that's about how much it would cost you. So there's an awful lot of value in this collection. The QR code's in the corner. Tessa's going to put a link to the toolkit in the chat, and I'm sure Rebecca's sending it around as well, but that QR code links to the toolkit too, and it will pop up again if you miss it this time. So one of the things that did come up with this Living Collections Assessment tool and that issue with gardens trying to do too much with too little was working out the priorities of your collections and sort of trying to introduce some a sense of good curation with botanic gardens. And I've got to give a shout out to Peter Symes here because there was a conversation with him that sparked this. But what we realised when we started digging was that curation of botanic gardens is often done by horticulturists and plant scientists. And it comes from a horticulture and plant science perspective. It's not often done by people that are trained curators, such as you get in museums. And I've actually recently come across a couple of people in American botanic gardens in collections management who are trained, do have qualifications and background in curation. But often with botanic gardens, it was more of we are doing it this way because it has always been done this way, rather than, understanding the principles of why you collect things. So we did a deep dive, or as deep as we could, where we did a Google search, we reached out to organisations, and we managed to track down 27 copies of collections plans, not just botanic gardens, but also zoos and museums. The Smithsonian in particular was fantastic to actually look at what are the overriding principles of curation. Why are you doing, how do you actually go about collecting things? And we came up with a list of sort of first principles of curation. And the first one of those is knowing who you are curating these collections for. Collections are held in trust for the public, and this is something museums are very aware of, and perhaps botanic gardens aren't. They're not just sort of collecting things for the sake of having them. Collections are accessible to the public either through display or through research. You might have some access restrictions on high value collections, but the eventual aim should be that those plants are being publicly available either through your garden or by providing germplasm material back for revegetation work. Knowing what you are collecting. This is about record keeping. So, knowing what plants you do actually have in your garden, where possible, their provenance. And of course, for botanic gardens, that gold standard is wild collected conservation, which has the most benefit for conservation work. Knowing where in the gardens your plants are. So, knowing where they've come from, knowing where they're located in the gardens now. Knowing when plants were added, when there were problems with maintenance, and when plants were removed from the collection, they were deaccessioned or die. How, knowing how to apply best practice principles. And then this is the big one, why, knowing the purpose of your collection and why you are collecting what you are. And I'd actually probably be interested if people could pop in the chat whether or not they do have a good sense of why they are collecting what you are collecting in your gardens. And with this why, the other thing that came out of this, because this process, I guess, did give us a chance to sort of take a step back and actually look at, you know, how botanic gardens function. What we realised was there's this spectrum of curation focus and why you're doing what you're doing. From one end, you've got the social, and, you know, good examples of that probably from outside Australia would be someone like Eden Project or someone like Gardens by the Bay, where the focus is on those social and cultural aspects, telling inspiring plant stories through beautiful, engaging collections and inspiring that love of plants. At the other end, you have the very scientific botanic gardens, which are really focusing on research and conservation aspects of plant collecting. You know, Edinburgh Botanic Gardens is all over that. Someone like Euroa Arboretum is very much down this end, and I'm sure there's going to be lots more. But most botanic gardens, and even the ones I've mentioned, exist on a gradient between the two. It's sort of two different ways of looking at your collections. And one of the things we realised was that the smaller gardens that are really tight on resources and time often can have the most benefit with this by they often tend to focus on this social end, and that's where they can provide the most use, as opposed to the science, which requires greater resources. So how do we actually focus in on curation, especially that why? We start by asking you a whole lot of questions about your garden. We ask, you know, your staffing levels. We ask how many collections you've got. We ask whether or not you're able to maintain them. We ask how well they're functioning. And we ask a whole lot of questions about the priorities, not of your collections, but of your gardens as a whole. And that's the sort of thing that if you're in an organisation that's got annual plans or strategic plans, you may be able to draw on them. Otherwise, you can put together a bit of a working group. We talk you through how to do this, to sit down and sort of nut that out. And those priorities in the gardens, you then answer questions about how well those individual collections meet those priorities. And the possible priorities we ask you about, and I won't read all of this, it's all on the toolkit. This is a massive dump of information today. Education could be an important priority for your gardens. That's not just children, that's adults, that's everyone. That also includes things like interpretation. Conservation is another reason for collecting plants. Research, so collections developed for botanical or horticultural research, scientific, social research, environmental research, and this could also include reference collections such as living herbaria. Cultural representation, and of course First Nations is a big part of this, but cultural representation can be in all sorts of ways. It can also be things like dementia gardens or children's gardens as well. Social, this is often a big thing for regional gardens, collections that are developed because they bring people joy, because people love them, expect them, desire them, because they've got a big connection to the town. And this is obviously Ballarat's begonias, which is sort of synonymous with Ballarat. Display, you could simply have your collections because they're meant to be beautiful and because they make people care about plants and because they bring joy and beauty. Local relevance, you know, things like, you know, plants that are locally Indigenous or rare and threatened, or plants for local home gardens if you've got a particularly complex microclimate. And what this comes back to is the focus of this plan is curation, it's not horticulture. And what we've tried to do is make this accessible for everyone, whether you have one horticulturist and that's it, or are only volunteers, through to organisations with 20 or 30 or 40. We're trying to go, okay, we can make this work for all of you, from the small through to the large. And how we've come up with this, working with the working group, is focusing on curation. So we're not saying get rid of your garden beds. We're not saying simplify your gardens, but there's a difference between curation and horticulture. So your whole garden, of course, should be maintained to good horticultural standards, but your curation focus, that who, what, where, how, when, the ones that you're actively working on strengthening that connection and getting your documentation right and getting your interps right, you're limiting the number of collections you're focusing on for that curation purpose. And the first type of collection that you might curate is a specialist collection. So we're looking at specialist collections as being, these are the pinnacle of Botanic Gardens curation, and they may often have wider aims beyond the individual garden. So they could be dealing with, say, rare and threatened plants, or they could be part of a meta collection. They might be part of a research project with a local university. These are the ones that they should be actively accessioned, monitored, interpreted, and where applicable, they should be focusing on known provenance and wild source stock. And obviously this requires a level of horticultural input that may be beyond, say, a volunteer-run organisation. It might not be, but these are the ones that are actually going to take up more of your time, more of your resources. And these are the ones that you sort of really be thinking carefully about which ones of these, how many of these are you actually able to support, and which ones are you going to focus on. The next level is thematic collections. So this is what we're saying is the first level of these actively curated collections. And these are basically tilted more to that social side over that scientific. So might be more about education and display. And this could be things like, say, rose gardens, children's gardens, sensory gardens. It could also just be a taxonomic collection that has slightly less conservation value. So it could be, I'm having trouble thinking of something here, Asteraceae. It would include appropriate interpretation, possibly education, but you might have less emphasis on wild procured known provenance stock. Obviously, if you've got a sensory garden, you might have some that's wild collected known provenance, but it's less of a focus than if you've got a rare and threatened garden. But the effort is still placed on those high horticultural standards, but it's about developing the people-related aspects of these collections. So these are collections that require a little bit less expertise in order to be able to manage well. You've then got landscape displays. And for a lot of botanic gardens, this is likely to be the bulk of your physical landscape, particularly the ones that aren't those big sort of tier 1 gardens. Tier 4 gardens, the big sort of mentoring inner city ones. You know, this could include historic plant collections that the toolkit indicates are no longer a priority. So you might have had an azalea garden for forever, but the toolkit said, look, you shouldn't be focusing your attention on that. So you're not getting rid of it. You're still maintaining it to good horticultural standards, but you're going to be less worried about if you've only got a limited number of plant labels you can roll out each year. Azaleas are not going to be your focus, for example. So it potentially includes any collections, the toolkit doesn't identify as a priority. And these ones are not necessarily actively curated, accessioned and developed, but they are maintained to good horticultural principles. And then around that, you've got the general living collection, because of course, every single plant in your garden is technically part of that living collection. And this is all about resource management. So if you don't have a lot of time, you're focusing in here. If you're something like Royal Botanic Gardens Melbourne, you're actually going to be able to deal with all of these in a very good way. So it's really about managing resources for the smaller gardens. So we're going to get into the demonstration of the actual toolkit now. I did want to point out, though, that there is a lot of background information and reading for this before you actually get into using the tools. And we have a step-by-step. There's basically, we give you a lot of instructions. We give you a lot of background. We give you a primer on what a botanic garden is, what living collections are, what does education mean in relation to collections. There's a heap of really good resources there. I know not everyone's going to want to sit down and read them, but if you do sit down and read the instructions top to tail, it will make a lot more sense in using the toolkit. But basically, we say start by using that how to use the toolkit. You then need to determine who's on your working group, because developing living collections is not something that should be done by one person. You need some input from multiple different voices, multiple perspectives within your organisation. And this is one of those things that how to use a toolkit does. It gives you advice on actually who you should be consulting with, what sort of plans you should be looking at. And then when you're ready to start assessing your collections, it's got instructions from there, and all of this is on the toolkit. So I am now going to see if I can get rid of PowerPoint and jump to the toolkit. So if you were to go into the toolkit right now, not being registered, this is all you would see. So this is the primer page. So it's got a little bit of information on the toolkit. You can register, information, contact us. So registration page here. Again, you register for your organisation, and what will happen is that there's one primary user per organisation who's then responsible for registering and adding individual users for your garden. Sorry, I should say it's per garden, not organisation. So for example, Botanic Gardens of Sydney have got 4 sites, so they would have 4 registrations if they wanted to use it on all of the sites. But it's got a little bit of a primer about living collections, just a bit of information for anyone who's coming in cold, who just wants to understand about what this toolkit is doing and why. It's got a little bit of information about the toolkit, and then you log in. So once you're registered, you can log in. Here's one I've logged into earlier, and this is where you get all the information, because the intention of this is it's a technical program for Botanic Gardens, so we didn't want everything available to anyone who comes across to find it or something that could be scraped by Google. So from here, we've got a step-by-step guide on how to use your toolkit. So this is all this information I was telling you about. So it's got information on introduction to the toolkit, what a botanic garden is, what living collections are, all that information I've discussed on the difference between curation and maintaining a garden, information on using the toolkit. It talks you through all those principles of plant collections, the purposes of your garden, types of collections, levels of curation, and it includes record keeping here, because that is the fundamental thing for Botanic Gardens. You need to have records of what you've got. And then it talks you through how to use the toolkit and develop the plan. And if you go to something like this, I'm just going to jump to purposes of plant collections. There's all these toolkit prompts here. So if you do sit down and read this start to finish, there's a whole lot of questions here that can actually start to get you thinking. And these are the sort of questions you might want to write down, come back to. Think about how strongly your garden is currently addressing the principles. What are your strengths and weaknesses? What is the focus of your garden? Where do you sit on the scale? Think about your resources and strengths. So these are the sort of information that it's helpful to have. It also talks you through the sort of documents you should be gathering and the sort of people you should be talking to. If you've got a sister botanic garden or one close by that you've got a good relationship with, you want to be chatting to each other. There's a fantastic list of resources here. It is somewhat Victorian based just because that's where the funding came from, so we had to do that. But it's got examples. It's got the landscape succession strategy. It's got germplasm information, good conservation strategies. It's got climate resources, soils, Botanic Gardens resources, information on legislation, on a Victoria, a federal and international level. So there's heaps of good links here with different information that may or may not be relevant to your garden, but it's a good go-to. So that's all the background that can actually give you the information you need to write a plan and use the toolkit. And you might just decide that you don't want to use the PDF function on here, but this will still give you really good primers to write your own plan. So that's all the background information. It then asks you a whole series of questions about your garden. So it's got garden details. Murray Botanic Gardens is a botanic garden we have made up for the purposes of demonstrating the toolkit. It was much easier to make up a garden than to try and do it accurately for an existing garden. So excuse me. So obviously you can go in, you can put in your address, you can put in your website, you can put in a logo which will appear on the cover of the report. You can change your header background. You can manage users here. So this is where one person from the garden would, I can see Virginia there from the systems garden. Virginia might be the, she might have primary user access there for the system garden, but then Virginia could add individual people that she wants to be able to have. And they might be people that have got editing access or viewing access, but you can then manage that. It then asks you a whole lot of questions about your garden. And this is how the tool helps make recommendations. So it will ask you how many existing collections you have. It will ask you how many full-time horticulturists you have. And then it asks you a statement about your gardens. The first one is, we can't keep up with the existing collections. We need to simplify something. The second option is, number of collections feels about right, but the composition may need refining. And the last one is, we want more collections. We're looking for guidance. So you have to pick there, how well are you managing at the moment? It asks you how many skilled volunteers you have that could manage a collection. and how many of these people are appropriately resourced and supported and highly skilled and capable of managing specialist collections. I'm just going to fiddle that around here. And out of that, it will make a recommendation of how many collections this toolkit thinks your garden can manage within your resources. And the whole point of managing resources here is to do less and do it well, because that's where you can actually provide the most benefit. So we're not trying to get you to reduce the quality of your curation. We're trying to get you to reduce the quantity of your curation. And again, that's curation, it's not horticulture. And from the information I put in here, this recommends that this particular garden can manage 8 specialist collections and 11 thematic collections there. And that's based on the resources they've got available. Now, you don't have to stick to that. This is a recommendation. It's an idea of providing some objectivity to your decision making. As a working group, you will decide as a whole whether or not you think that sounds right for you. It also asks you questions about how the types of collections in your garden and how they're performing, because we ask then a series of questions about each collection, about how well they fit those priorities we discussed, but also practicalities. Are they climate appropriate? Can you manage the biosecurity? Do you have space for these collections? We ask a question about, does this have particular local relevance? Because if you've got a horticulturist, for example, who is passionate about fuchsias, you are going to get a really strong collection from that person because they're following their passion, and that's something that ought to be embraced. So these questions help determine whether the calculations in the background prioritise the priorities part of the collection match or the practicalities. So new garden, still in planning, will equal it out. Existing garden with no to few collections, little thematic consistency and poorly performing planting, basically everything's a problem. Again, it's probably going to be fairly even. But then you have gardens with strong collections, but horticultural and climate issues. That one's going to focus on the practicalities over the priorities, because you've got your priorities in line, your practicalities are an issue. So we're going to focus on those. Good horticultural basis from the plantings, some botanically interesting specimens, but few or no collections. That one is going to focus on the priorities. So I can think of gardens that fit into this category where the horticulture is great, but they need advice on actually getting that who, what, where, how, why, how lined up. And then you've got ones that are doing everything right. And again, that's going to be more of a 50-50 there. So this is how we sort of start to rank the collections. So it also asks about how developed your space is, and that's to do with the lifespan. There's then information here where you can collect all your climate data. And the idea of this is this toolkit is not using this data in its recommendations, but quite often it's very easy to have all that information bopping around in the background and no one's actually written it down in one coordinated place. So this is a chance to write it all down in one coordinated place. And this is the sort of thing too you can get from the BGCI climate assessment tool. So this is the sort of thing we talk you through how to find this information about your garden. So instead of you just guessing, you've actually gone and found it. You can then upload images that'll go in the plans. You can fill out your acknowledgements here, and there's a glossary of terms. And this is a combination of provided glossaries of terms, and then you can add your own. So, you know, I've added Friends and Murray Botanic Gardens here in the glossary. I've added elm leaf beetle in the glossary. So it's a collection of standard terms and ones you can add. Then we get to the garden's priorities, and this is where out of education, conservation, research, cultural representation, social display and local relevance, it forces you to prioritise them, because it's really easy as a garden to go, absolutely every one of those is important. We need to do all of it. And this tool forces you to take a step back and go, no, you've got to put them in some sort of order. And it does that by only allowing you to have 2 as principal purpose of the collection. So in this case, education and conservation are principal purpose, research isn't a priority, cultural is a low priority, social is helpful but not essential. And you can change these around. So we might actually go, no, local relevance is really important, cultural representation is really important, but it's only going to let you have 2 of those at that level. And it will pop up with a, no, I don't have any issues there. If I put more than 2 in there, it would have come up with an error message and forced me to change it there. So once you've filled out all that background information, you can then start assessing your collections. So this is where you've put in a list of all your potential collections here, and I've just put in a whole lot of potential collections. You can add as many as you like here. We could do, we are going to add a collection. We are going to do a cacti and succulent collection. We think this, you can change your mind on whether it's specialist or thematic, but at the moment we're going to go specialist. We are going to have an outpost of Melbourne's arid garden here. Melbourne don't know this, but this is what we're going to do in this garden. This is a taxonomic collection and it's a proposed collection, because whether it's existing or proposed affects the weighting as well. Basically, it weights you in favour of an existing collection that is performing well, because that's obviously something you should persist with over getting a proposed one. If it's existing, it then asks you how successful it is. This one's proposed. You then assess the collection, and it asks you a whole series of questions here. How well does that meet education? And this time you can have as many as you want at a higher level. So education's great, conservation is fantastic, research, not really, cultural representation, some complexities, social is good, display is fantastic, local relevance, you know, we want it, but it's not particularly relevant. And then it asks practicalities. Is it climate suitable? Yes, it is. Can you manage the biosecurity? Yes, we can. Resource and maintenance is going to be complicated. They're cacti. Local importance, design. Yes, we can manage it from a design point of view. Yes, we have space. Yes, it aligns with our other strategies and plans. And it then tells you it thinks the cacti and succulent collection has very good alignment with this garden. So there is one other thing with this. I've put in a few here. I've filled them out as background, and you can see it's got begonias are very good, Murray River corridor very good. Then we've got good for Banksia, Araucariaceae acceptable. It's got poor alignment for an alpine collection. The other thing it does is this caution needed. So what the caution is that if you have any of these practicalities except for local importance, this one, it says resourcing and maintenance has said at risk of not meeting the collection's purpose. If any of these practicalities has significant complexities, doesn't meet or detracts, or is at risk here, it's going to trigger a caution. And that's a way of saying, we're not saying you shouldn't collect this. We're saying red flag, you've got to think about whether or not this is still a good idea. And it may be that it is. The one that the working group spent a bit of time discussing was myrtle rust. Obviously, a collection of Myrtaceae might be really low on biosecurity, but it's still worth persisting anyway because of the conservation values. So it then asks you, can those risks be mitigated? Should they be mitigated? If you say yes, they can, and yes, they should, the caution will disappear. So it's not saying don't collect this. It's just flagging that there's other aspects, other complexities that you're going to have to be aware of. So once you've worked through this, this is saying that this particular garden could have up to 20 collections altogether. You go through and choose the ones you want to add to your plan. And I'm going to pass over to Tessa now.
All right, thank you, Andrea. I'm going to need to steal the screen from you.
Yep.
Yeah, awesome. Screen share, window. All righty. Now, I really want to highlight that actually the bulk of coming up with a living collections plan is everything Andrea talked about. There is a lot of soul searching to be done and a lot of thinking and assessing and just a lot of, this is the bulk of the work. All of that was the bulk of the work. The end result, which I'm going to talk about here, which you put in your inputs and come up with a lovely graphically laid out PDF, is actually almost incidental afterwards. So after you've done everything Andrea talked about, you've got all your collections lined up. Actually, I'll start over here. Come on, internet. Jump in here. You'll see over here, you can generate a plan, and essentially you just click then what collections you want to add. So again, not all of these collections might exist. Some of them you want to propose, and maybe you've thought about it and decided, no, we're not going to pursue that. So you might leave that out. But the collections you do want to include, you click them all and then you generate plan. That will pop up over here. And you can see I have a sandbox that I've been doing all the playing around and testing in. We'll use Andrea's just because hers is much better laid out and her filler text is not as crazed as mine. And this will put you through to what Andrea said was the choose your own adventure part of things. So it's got methodology, which is basically you talking about your stakeholders, who you're thanking, the documents you looked into. You can fill all that out and that will get included in your plan. The introduction, again, you've got many thanks to Andrea. All of that thinking she's done, she's provided an incredible amount of content here in which all of that thinking, that high level thinking has been put in terms of defining what a botanic garden is, what the purposes are, the history of botanic gardens in Australia, and of course, why you need to plan for living collections. And there are a few text boxes in here where we've allowed it so that you might want to edit it a little bit just depending on your context. It talks about, again, the specifics of curation, which is not horticulture, talking about the wheres and whys. You can talk a bit of an introduction here on our non-existent botanic garden where you talk a little bit about your garden. That's when you're getting into it. Talk about the purposes. You can get into it there and so on. And again, still going on with like the definitions of the various collections and whatnot, and you'll be adding little sections here about how these definitions, the role they play in your collections in your garden. And then we get into this bit here, your living collections, and you can see that they are divided up into thematic and specialist. This is actually something that you determine when you pop them in here. You can add, this is great, you can add in a little header image for each collection. This is basically providing a snapshot of how it is. It's a specialist, the type is taxonomic. You've got a little description, a little synopsis there, where it's located in your gardens, the strengths and engagement strengths, the priorities that you would like to focus on in terms of developing it, and if you've got any like absolute rock star specimens. And so you can see we've got a couple of specialist collections here, then the thematic collections, which are the same layout. Oh, that one hasn't been filled in. There we go. Rose collections, again, all the same, but this is essentially provides a great little snapshot of the collections in your garden, how they are now, as well as, you know, some directions that you want to take it in. Then we get on to some of the nitty-gritty decisions that you have had to have made. So there is the general living collection, which is, you know, the landscape as a whole. You can talk about how the challenges and basically the state of that as it is now. Again, getting in with the difference, talking about the different specialist and thematic collections and how they play out in your gardens, your priorities. Landscape display goes into, you know, most of our gardens, we have sections that aren't considered collections, but they've got something of a theme about them. So for example, the sensory garden in Melbourne Botanic Gardens is not a formal collection, but we consider that a sort of themed area. They're also noted because, of course, they might later become collections, or they're still focuses in terms of your horticulture and where you're putting your resources, not researchers. You might be developing new gardens, again, not collections, but just sort of new themed areas. Here is where you can lay them out and pop them into your plan. Then it will be asking you questions about any collections that you are retiring or deaccessioning. So, of course, the assessment that Andrea talked about will make recommendations that perhaps collections don't align with your priorities, or maybe you don't have the resources, or perhaps you yourself know that they're just not doing well for whatever reason. And after you've done all that thinking, you've decided maybe there are some collections that you're just going to retire. You're no longer going to actively curate them, but they're just going to become part of the general landscape display. And this will be essentially identifying what the issues with those collections were and why, even when, because there are some options here for, struggling collections, having gone through these, you've decided even with those suggestions, you just can't continue with them. It will be noted there that you can, this is the decision that was made, this is why it was made, and also here are some specimens that perhaps they're really good on their own and you still want to keep them as real rock stars. So that will be noted there. A section here for further information. There might be specific resources and websites that you want to capture in the plan. So perhaps there are some plans, like we've got the Australian Native Plant Conservation germplasm resource there. We've got the Landscape Succession Strategy from Melbourne, a link to the Climate Change Alliance of Botanic Gardens. Perhaps you've got master plans and other tree plans or historic conservation management plans as well that you want to throw in, collaborators, and any other notes that you would like to pop in. So this is sort of the collection for other resources that you would like to be captured in this document. And now here's the meaty stuff, the action modules. I'm not going to go through all of them because they are quite meaty, but these are essentially providing the direction and the targets and the goals for these particular aspects of managing a botanic garden. So we'll just focus on record keeping for now because that is absolutely fundamental with the difference between a botanic garden and any other garden. This is going to basically ask you to think about the state of your current record keeping, and then we'll make recommendations that you can select from on how you're going to develop that going forward. And in this, you'll be asked to think about where the state of your record keeping lies. And it should be noted that for each module, record keeping, climate, acquisition, display, you might not be in the same state. You might have incredibly advanced record keeping, but perhaps you're only, say, a new or foundation garden when it comes to looking at climate work, or maybe you're just intermediate when it comes to display. So this is something that you'll have to sit back and have a real think about, again, where you are in that. Let's say
I'll also add too that the list of starting actions for someone on foundation is going to be much more straightforward than someone on advanced. And this is how we manage your resources as well.
Yeah. So for example, if I just click here, you can see it changes. You've changed the choose your own adventure. Your decisions have sent you down another path. So we will start with new garden, which is quite simple, where we've made a number of recommendations where you need to develop an accession system. You might want to choose between these two, option 1 and option 2. You will need to choose one, but you get to choose them. Some here, like for example, this, perhaps you want to add or remove the particular details that you are going to be capturing. So let's say we don't want, you do want providence, but just for the hell of it, I'm going to delete it. Let's just say we don't want to know that. You can do that as well. You might want to not capture that. You can hide that. That will not be a part of your actions. I do recommend taking it though. It's very useful. And then, hang on, I've just got to move Teams out of the way. You'll save that, and essentially that will capture these as your actions. I'm just going to go back and have another quick go through, and you'll see if I change this to, say, advanced, where we've got, so let's say we're really advanced in our record keeping and we're using like a bespoke database like, Iris or Hortus or that sort of thing, there will be a totally different line of actions here suggested, where you can describe what you're doing and how you're going to continue it, what you're going to be updating. We're going to be talking about plant labels and whatnot instead. So these are tiered and bespoke to essentially where you are at in your record keeping. Now, once you have filled out everything, and I do mean everything, you'll be able to hit generate PDF and it will spit out this beautiful laid out PDF, which we're not going to get into just because we've been faffing around with this so much and some of this is not filled out and it will take too long. So I'll toss it back to Andrea and she can pull out one that we have developed earlier. And I will get out of sharing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Can everyone see that? And here's one we developed earlier. So you've got the cover. You can put your own images on the cover. You can have your logo. You can have your title, your date. It's got acknowledgements. It's got your glossary. It's got your full table of contents, and then it goes through. And the way we've worked most of it is how most of us will write documents. You start with general information and then you get into the specifics. So it's got a bit on your garden. What is a botanic garden? All of this I'm going to jump through. Talks about, but then you've got pages for each of your collections. Talks about your landscape displays. It talks about retiring, deaccessioning, and then it's got these action modules where you'll have your record keeping, your actions, climate, information on climate. This is where all that information you put in on climate at the start will be caught at this page. So it's a chance to actually have a proper formal document that's captured all of this for you instead of having to hunt the information each time. Actions, acquisition, we are still just refining. The layout has been fixed since I did this. This was the sample I created a few weeks ago. And then it's got all that information at the back. And it will tell you which version of the toolkit it generated. Because I guess the next thing we did want to talk about was that this is version 1 of this toolkit. We already have a running list of extra action modules we would like to develop in future. I had someone ask about more information pertinent to Arboreta. Here, I think there is a fair bit that is relevant to Arboreta, but we're already looking at, we'd like an action module that deals with tree collections, for example, would like one that deals with heritage landscapes, would like one that goes into interpretation in more detail. We just cover interpretation and display at the moment. Would like one that goes into biosecurity more. We just touch on that in climate at the moment. So this has been a version 1 with the funding that we've got available. We're also sure that there'll be the level of technical stuff that went into developing the website, and I cannot program at all, but I know it's been technically complicated to write, so I'm sure there'll be a couple of little bugs that come through. We'll get all those fixed too, but I think we have this incredibly robust, exciting tool that will help everyone develop their collections more strongly. Cass, do you want to jump back in?
Hello, thank you both very much. Obviously, as you can see, there's a huge amount of work that's gone into this. And although it does obviously simplify the process for your garden, there is still a lot of thought that you have to put into it. And just recognizing, I guess, what was mentioned at the beginning, it is really good if you can do it as a team rather than an individual. So if you can access that network of people. There are a couple of questions within the chat. If there are any more, they have been answered, but I thought maybe it was just worth touching on. Rachel, just quickly, you'd asked about is there a benchmark for the species per collection? And Tessa had said, that really is up to the curators and those on ground. And I think just in consideration of that, it really does depend on your collection. So it's very difficult to set a benchmark. So if you're looking at, doing a rainforest collection, it's going to be quite different to an arid land. So it's very hard. You can't really put a benchmark in there, I guess. And what was the other one there we had around the budget? So whether this can then be utilised to help budgeting. And I think the actions that come out of that are probably quite useful for that, because that gives you a list of things where you can go, okay, well, this is what we need to do. What would that cost us? So you could utilise that information to pop into a case for support there as well. Were there any new ones that popped in? Yeah,
and that
go,
was
please.
one of the purposes of this document, was it's the sort of thing you could put in front of everyone from the new apprentice to the new CEO to explain what you do, why you do it. But I think it's definitely something that can be used to support funding applications. You have a living collections plan, you've got actions, it's been adopted. Yeah, sorry, Cass.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. No, thank you. I just saw there's two more that have popped in, or one from Paul. Is this a question? Sorry. Is it easier to provide evidence? Have you seen that one, Tessa or Andrea? Just in relation to does the size of it? Yeah.
So yes, it does, and no, it doesn't. This is actually where we went round and round on circles with the working group more than anything else, was the size of the collection. And that's why this is a decision-making tool, not an absolute. And that's where, when you go into the background information, the working group comes in, because you might actually go, we've got two collections that are relatively easy to maintain. We think one horticulturist can manage them. Or you might have collections. I know Q's got collections that have got 2 or 3 people managing them because of their size. So the number of collections there is something that the working group actually makes a decision on. So that's something that we leave that to you to factor in, that if you've got a big complex collection, it might require more resources than a simple one. Yeah. But yes, it was basically something that we wanted it to still allow a degree of autonomy from you, the curators, because you know your garden. It was more just helping provide that objectivity.
And Kate, I can see you've got your hand up there. Did you have a question? You just have to unmute yourself potentially.
Yeah, kia ora, can you hear me?
Yep.
Kia ora from the West Island.
Hello, kia ora.
Fantastic presentation. Really good to see you all. Another mind-blowing bit of work. Really great. Just got a question from Wellington Botanic Garden, where I'm working at the moment. We're due to do a collections review next year on our landscape. Just thinking, would you advise doing our collections review first and then running the toolkit to refine the collections for the future? What do you think about that?
I think the toolkit could be used for your collections review. So, yeah.
So kind of simultaneous?
I think this could almost become your collections review, the toolkit. I mean, you could do it separately, in which case the toolkit provides lots of resources. So you could look through those resources and think, no, we want to do it differently to that. But equally, this could be your collections review.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
I'm just conscious of time. I guess what we wanted to, if anyone does have any further questions, please do reach out to us. You can register to get on board with the toolkit and start using it. Registrations are open now, so we please do jump on there. We will start processing those as of Monday, though. So don't expect that today you will be able to access it. Sorry. So we will just tidying up a few loose ends in the back end. And so then we will be live as of next week. The other thing is we have been discussing obviously additional training. So with this though, I think it's going to be very important that you actually start to have a play first. And so that we have an idea of where the complications are, where the challenges are, where do you need additional support. So, and we're thinking of doing a number of different formats here. So a couple will be 3-hour workshops where we can get online and really get into it. And we would require you to come to those sessions with some experience of utilising it so we know where those challenges are. Then there'll also be a number of online training modules that will be created. These will be shorter, little bite-sized pieces of the different aspects of the toolkit. And then finally, we'll have some little drop-ins or coffee chats where, Andrea, Tessa may be sitting online and you can pop in. There'll be a half-hour window where you can jump in and ask some questions. So we haven't set a timing for them as yet because we were waiting to see, I guess, where the interest is and where the challenges are so that we could set those up. So I think I mean, we could potentially set one for in a couple of weeks' time, or otherwise we wait until you tell us. So I'm kind of open to suggestions here.
Can I just
really
reinforce?
Yeah.
I know I'm going to keep banging on about it, but please read that how to use the toolkit top to bottom. So make yourself a cup of tea, sit back and go through it, because that will provide a lot of background information before you get too deep in the tools.
And obviously a lot of work's gone into that. So, it would be good if that we don't have to then just reiterate what's actually already written.
Yeah.
I think the sessions will be really around the application. So, what are you struggling with in actually applying the tool and what's there? Yeah. Kate, do you have another question, or is your hand just still up?
Sorry, I've just removed that.
That's all right. No worries. So we'll probably we'll set up a time, I'd say, for one of the deeper dives in a couple of weeks' time. So once everyone has had a chance to have a read and look through. Certainly, if you come across anything in that meantime, though, please let us know, because then we can make sure that we add that to that training workshop. And we'll announce the date probably next week, once we have an idea of how many people have registered and what that interest level is. So yeah, as I mentioned, if there was any further questions, please just shoot them through. You can either email us directly, or you jump onto the Toolkit website and do the contact me or the registration. Anyway, it will all come to us, so we don't mind. And so just another big thank you, huge thank you to everybody who was involved in the development of this, and to Andrea and Tessa for all the time you've put into it, and for coming along today to demonstrate it to everybody.
Thank you. And thanks, Cass and John and Cherie and everyone, and Tex and everyone at BGANS.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. Have a lovely Friday.